Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of This Week in the Clinic. So happy to have you join me again today. Today we are diving into a topic where I get a ton of questions on. What is the best diet for me, for you, for anyone? And I spend a lot of time here in my clinic helping people determine what that best diet is and really to figure out what the best diet is to support their body and to make sure that they're supporting their physiology in the best way possible. So for those of you who might be joining me for my first time, or for your first time, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Josh Gitalis. I'm a clinical nutritionist and functional medicine practitioner, and I run a practice here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And I also spend part of my time running my functional nutrition certification program, which has students from all over the world enrolled in it, and we take students through a whole bunch of courses on functional nutrition, helping them to understand certain systems of the body, how to use supplements, how to use food for healing, how to use certain lifestyle interventions, and it's lots of fun. I love teaching it, and I love just teaching in general, and that's why I'm here today again, talking today about what the best diet is for you and your body. So, a few points on what we're going to cover today is why is there such a debate about the best diet? Commonalities of all diets. So we've heard so many different diets out there. There's a new diet in the news every other day. You know, what do they all have in common? You know, can we find some commonalities between all of them? What did indigenous people eat? You know, we can learn a lot from our ancestors. After all, we've been on this planet as Homo sapiens for over 2.6 million years. So they had to have been doing something, right? Because we're here today. So what is it that they were doing? And can we look at some indigenous tribes today to maybe learn from them to see what they might be doing to help us understand what the human body needs? What does the research show about eating animal food? So, you know, there's been a lot of research on different types of diets. Well, what does it say about, paleo versus vegan? And we'll get into that. A little bit about nutrient deficiencies that might be associated with certain diets. So, you know, one of the key reasons why people seek out a specific diet or want to follow a specific diet or even notice some really great results from a specific diet is because of what's in the foods that they're eating on that diet. The nutrients, the vitamins, the minerals, the phytonutrients that give the plants all their nice colors. So we'll talk about that. And most importantly, how to determine the best diet for you, the best diet for me. And as I work with people every week, every day in my clinic, what is the best diet for them to best support the healing process? This is going to be a fun one. So again, thank you all for joining me today. And if you have questions as we go along, feel free to post them up. We appreciate the interaction, and I know that you probably have a lot of burning questions about this topic, and I'd be happy to answer them as I go along here. Okay, so the first thing I want to just talk a little bit about is the fact that we are talking about what the best diet is for you, right? It's amazing that here in North America specifically, and developed countries, and even a lot of underdeveloped countries, we actually have a choice. We have a choice on what we can eat. Now, for thousands and thousands of years, people didn't really have a choice. They looked around in their environment to see what was growing. They looked around to see in their environment what was living, right? What types of animal foods there were, whether it was fish, whether it was wild game. And they lived off of what was in their environment. Today, it still just blows my mind when I walk into a grocery store, the abundance that's before us. We can walk around that place and we can choose anything off the shelves. And that is an amazing thing, right? So the fact that we're talking today about the vegan diet, about the paleo diet, about some other diets that I mentioned, and that we can actually choose which diet to follow it just blows my mind on a daily basis. And even beyond that, if you walk around a grocery store, you can actually choose if you're going to be eating health-promoting foods or if you're going to be eating health-degrading foods. And just, to throw that out there, if you go in the middle aisles, you're probably going with the health-degrading. If you're following the circumference of the grocery store, you're probably going with the health-promoting, just as a general rule. So I just wanted to throw that out there before we get into it, that it's just amazing that we can have this conversation about choice and about actually choosing which type of diet we can have, while in so many places around the world, they don't have a choice. They have to eat a specific type of food, and even in human history, they haven't really had a choice, right? If potatoes grow in the field, you eat potatoes. So with that, let's dive into it. There have been so many diets introduced into our vocabulary. You go into any bookstore, you go to their health section, and there's just aisles and aisles and shelves of books on different diets. So there's the paleo diet, there's the vegan diet, there's different types of vegetarian diets like lacto-ovo, pescatarian. There's the ketogenic diet, which is, just blown up as of late. There's the rainbow diet. There's the Atkins diet. There's the FODMAPs diet. There's the macrobiotic diet. There's the zone diet. There's the raw food diet. There's the Mediterranean diet. There's the modified Mediterranean diet. I could go on and on. Which one is the right diet for us? Different research comes out on different diets, and it gets quite confusing. So first I want to talk a little bit about what are the commonalities between all of these diets that I just mentioned. I think it's a little bit important to first establish that. And one of the main things is that all of these diets eliminate refined carbohydrates, sugars, and processed foods. So, sometimes, and this is what I often tell my students, is that just doing one of these diets and eliminating all the crap is going to help with healing in a profound way. So, I could go on a vegan diet, and if I was eating the standard American diet, well, I've just cut out all of my sugars, all my refined carbs, all of my processed foods, right? Or I can go on a paleo diet, and again, if I'm doing it the right way, I've just cut out all the sugars, all the refined carbs, and all the processed foods. So either one you choose, you've just cut out a huge factor in degenerative diseases and cancers and cardiovascular disease and diabetes, which we all know to be true. So that's sort of an interesting fact to understand. So, if you take the same person, you put them on a vegan diet, and they were eating the standard American diet, you put them on a vegan diet, and they're cutting out all those processed foods, or you put them on a paleo diet, they might find benefits from both diets. So I think that's one important thing to understand. Okay, now let's talk about some of the differences in these diets and sort of how to choose the right diet for you. Well, first, I want to just show you a couple beautiful groups of people. So with that, I'm just going to share a couple photographs here. And the first photograph you're looking at is a photograph of the Nenets, well, an individual from the Nenet tribe. They're a Russian tribe that live in the northern parts of Russia. As you can see, I don't think this guy would be wearing that type of garb if he was living near the equator, so it's quite cold up there. And what do they eat? Does anyone have any guesses on what the Nenets eat on a daily basis for sustenance? A little sip of the old green tea while I see if any answers come in. So the Nenets actually eat reindeer meat. This is their diet. This is what they're eating for sustenance. Reindeer meat. They have it raw, frozen, or boiled. They sometimes add the blood of the reindeer as well. And they eat fish, salmon, and, wait for it, cranberries, right? So they're eating much of just what's in their area, a lot of wild game, a lot of animal foods. Now, there's a lot of talk about the ketogenic diet these days. And if you're eating this type of diet that they're eating, you might actually get close to something that looks like a ketogenic diet. They don't have a lot of fruits and vegetables in their diet, but they do get some when they're in season, and that's what makes up most of their diet. The fat, the protein, that's really helpful for giving them good fat on their body and some good meat on the bones because they're in a very cold climate. So that becomes very important for them. They're also very active. There's also a lot more calorie burning taking place when we're in a cold environment because of the cold against the skin. The body has to work harder to stay warm. So that's one, I guess, beautiful indigenous tribe that still eats their indigenous diet today. We actually also have some indigenous tribes here in Canada that live up in the Arctic, the Inuit. And you sort of get these two groups of Inuit that are living today. I actually had a good friend of mine, who was is a physiotherapist and did an internship up north did a placement up north in Nunavut, which is northern Canada. And what she told me was quite shocking is that in their grocery store, they basically have absolutely no fresh fruits and vegetables because they have to fly everything up and it costs a lot. She said she went grocery shopping one time and there was just one sad head of broccoli that was kind of browning, that was just kind of sitting there. So most of the food that people are eating up there are processed. Or you get some of the other people that live up there that have maybe been around for longer, they're a bit older, that live off the land and are still hunting. They're still eating seal, they're still eating polar bear, they're still eating the foods of the land, and that's what they're sustaining on. So you get like these very, very two wide ranges of dietary habits. Obviously, the ones that are living off the food that they've been consuming for most of their life are a lot healthier than the ones that are eating a lot of processed food. So that's one tribe that we're looking at. And another beautiful group of people are the Maasai, which I think a lot of people have heard of. They're a tribe that live in Tanzania. And would you have any guesses as to what they consume? Of course, they live a lot closer to the equator. It's a much hotter environment, but I would say that this is actually a polar opposite, no pun intended, of the type of life they're living. Any ideas what they eat? Anyone have any thoughts or guesses on what they eat? So the Maasai eat raw milk, raw meat, raw blood. Okay. They eat raw butter for infants. They think it's very important for infants to eat raw butter. And more recently, because of our global world, because of the influence from the outside world, they are farming corn and they're eating a lot more corn. But again, a lot of animal foods. And we also see that in the work of Weston A. Price, when he went around in the 1930s and looked at tribes all over the world, indigenous tribes, many of which had never even tasted white sugar, white flour, the foods of Western societies, he found that pretty much every tribe had some sort of animal food in their diet. And these are tribes that were highly spiritual, that had been sustaining off the land for many, many, many years. So veganism as a discipline, as a type of diet, is actually somewhat of a new discipline. There is no known tribe that actually sustained purely off of vegetables to get all their nutrients. And we're going to look at some of the research and some of the information on that. Now, again, I'm not really interested in the name of diets. People sometimes ask me, Josh, are you a vegetarian? Josh, are you a vegan? That's the more common questions. And my answer usually is no, I'm a Joshitarian. I eat what's best for my body. you know what, some days I actually do eat a vegan type diet. Some days I eat more of a ketogenic or a paleo type diet. It really depends on what I'm up to that day, what I'm up to at that point in my life, and what my body needs. And that's exactly the same way I work with my clients. So we're going to move on here a little bit and look at some of the research. So there are many correlative studies that show that higher meat consumption is associated with higher risk of cancer and mortality, all-cause mortality. So what's up with that? Well, you know, oftentimes in these studies, it's quite difficult to isolate one dietary intervention. Because what we find, and these are a lot of correlative studies, not necessarily causative studies, because what we find is that typically people that might be on a vegetarian diet, right, they're not eating animal foods, are also a little bit more health conscious. So they're also doing other lifestyle interventions that are actually helping them to be more healthy. So for example, you know, you have a vegetarian that might be consuming you know, only vegetables, but they're also exercising. You know, they're also, you know, biking or running or doing some sort of activity like that on a regular basis, and that is going to end up processing the food that they eat in a much more different way. So again, as I mentioned, there are a lot of studies that show that meat consumption does increase risk of, you know, things like cancer and all-cause mortality, but they're not looking at the full picture, in my opinion. And there was an interesting study that came out in 2016 in JAMA, so pretty recent, and it was just a small sample group that they looked at, 131,342 people. I'm just being sarcastic, that's quite a big group. And what they found is that they actually did, in fact, that the high intake of meat consumption was associated with higher mortality or cancer, but here's the kicker. It was the same risk in people who didn't have any of the following risk factors. So there was only an increased risk of all-cause mortality and cancer in people if they had one of the following. If they were obese, if they were a smoker, if they were inactive, in other words, they were sedentary, they didn't exercise, or they consumed alcohol on a regular basis. So meat consumers who didn't have these actually had no increase in mortality and cancer. And that's really interesting looking at this study, because what it's telling us is that that lifestyle aspect plays a very important role in this full picture, right? So just to reiterate, if people consumed animal products, but they had one of those factors, they drank alcohol, they were obese, they were inactive, or they were a smoker, they did really increase their risk of cancer and all-cause mortality. But if they didn't have any of those, their risk was no more than those who didn't eat animal foods. Interesting study. So what this kind of leads me to and furthers in terms of my opinion on eating animal foods is that you kind of have to figure out what's right for your body. And there are definitely specific nutrients and factors in animal foods that may or may not be available in plant foods as well. And that's what leads me to what I call responsible omnivorism. Okay, so I was actually at a conference recently, and someone told me there's this new term going around called what was it called? Reducenism or something. Reducitarianism, where people try to reduce the amount of animal foods they have. But what I call it, which is very similar, is responsible omnivorism, or whatever you want to call it. A responsible omnivore. And that's kind of how I describe myself. And what does that mean? That means consuming the amount that's right for you, right? So it's not about going to a restaurant and eating a 16-ounce steak. A 16-ounce steak can serve a family of 4 quite easily, and they'll all get the protein needs that they need and the nutrients they need. And also making sure that we choose animal products that are sustainably sourced, right? So we're looking at, grass-fed, pasture-fed beef. We're looking at free-range chickens. We're looking at wild fish And when we eat these sources, we don't just do a service to the animal because the animal's lived a good, happy life. We also do a service to the environment and the world as a whole. Okay, so that's called responsible omnivorism. Now let's look at some of the key factors in animal foods that I look at in my clients to see if they might be deficient or they might have the right amount. And the first one, which is probably the one that most people are aware of, is B12. And B12 is often deficient in people who are vegan. So there was a study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition in 2003. And what they found was that 68% of vegetarians were deficient in vitamin B12. 83% of vegans were deficient in B12. And 5% of omnivores were deficient in B12. Now, B12 is a very important nutrient in the body. It's critical for the health of our whole nervous system, for the myelin sheath that houses all of our nerves around the body. If you have a B12 deficiency and you have a long-term B12 deficiency, you can actually cause permanent nerve damage. It's also critical for making blood. It's critical for certain methylation processes in the body, for making neurotransmitters. It's critical for energy. You know, a lot of people, one of the first symptoms they experience when they're B12 deficient is fatigue. They go to their doctor, they get the B12 checked, it's low, and they realize they're B12 deficient. So it's a very important nutrient, and it's quite difficult to get it from plant foods. In fact, you have to exclusively get it from animal foods if you want sufficient amounts. Otherwise, you have to supplement it. And what I'm talking about here is looking at the right diet for you where you don't have to supplement. You know, supplements are great, but they're supplements. That's why they're called supplements. They're a supplement to a diet, and we use them if the diet is falling short in some way. So B12 would be one nutrient that would be very difficult to get on a vegan or vegetarian diet, and that's what I look at in my clients. So another key point here is that, you know, I've known maybe a couple people who are vegans and are quite healthy and are thriving on it. I've known way more people who were vegans at one point, realized it wasn't serving them, and then moved more to an omnivorous diet. And I know a lot of people who are paleo or keto who are quite healthy and thriving quite nicely. And I've also known people who are paleo and not doing so well, and there's other reasons why that's going on. So, you know, it's not always so black and white, but B12 is a nutrient which we can check. So if someone came in to me, a client, and said, hey, you know, I'm a vegan, and I think it's the right diet for me, and we check their blood and their B12 levels are low, well, evidence is pointing in a different direction. Another nutrient that is somewhat difficult to get from a vegan or vegetarian diet is iron. So iron, there's actually two types of iron. There's heme iron and there's non-heme iron. So heme iron is the iron that we find in animal foods, and that iron is about 10 to 30% absorbable. The iron that we find in plants is called a non-heme iron, and we absorb about 8 to 10% of it. So we have a lot less absorbability of that iron. Now, if we put on top of that some people aren't digesting properly or might have low stomach acid, that even makes it more difficult to absorb that iron. And the last episode, number 17, we talked all about digestive issues, stomach acid, and why that is so important for absorbing minerals, especially iron. Another nutrient that's very important that we have to be aware of is zinc. Okay, so in vegetables, the absorption of zinc is reduced by about 35% compared to animal products because it's bound to phytic acid, phytates. And your body has to disassociate that zinc from the phytates to be able to liberate it, to actually digest it and absorb it properly. So zinc is another one that we look out for. And of course, zinc is so important for the immune system. It's part of many enzymes around the body, but it's critical for almost every aspect of immunity in the body. In fact, if you go into a health food store and you have like a sore throat or something, oftentimes they'll recommend a zinc lozenge because it's so effective at killing the pathogen and also boosting the immune system. Another area which a lot of people exclusively on plants miss out on is EPA and DHA, two long-chain omega-3s that are critical for our nervous system. In fact, our brain, yes, your brain is mostly fat. And we all want nice, good, healthy brains. It's 60% fat, and about 8% of the dry weight of the brain is DHA, which is unattainable from animal sources, is unattainable from vegetable sources, from plant sources. You have to convert the omega-3s that we might find in hemp seeds, chia seeds, flax seeds, into those longer chain omega-3s. And that's not such a big deal. Like you might say, Josh, well, my body will just convert what I need. And I would say, yeah, that might be true, but many people are poor converters. So different people have what are called genetic polymorphisms, or we could call them genetic weaknesses that slow that conversion down, and I'll give them the ability to actually make those long chain omega-3s. So it's really important omega-3s for especially for pregnant women, especially for infants and children. They've looked at the DHA in breast milk, and they find that the DHA in breast milk when a child is breastfed is highly associated with how good they are at critically thinking when they're 8 years old. Right? Now, luckily, we can actually get these longer chain omega-3s in supplement form for those people who need to up their dosage and might only be eating plants. But again, that is a supplement. They're missing out what they should be getting from the diet. We also know that in order to do proper conversion of those omega-3s, you need zinc and iron. So if a person is zinc and iron deficient, they can't even do those conversions properly. And as we spoke about before, zinc and iron are somewhat difficult to obtain from plant foods. So I'm just going to take a quick breather here to check in to see what types of, if there's any questions or comments here online, and feel free to add any questions if you want. Okay, so Steph Jensen is asking, can you give an example of what type of day you'd eat, paleo versus vegetarian? Oh, that's a good question. So I mentioned earlier that sometimes I might eat vegetarian, sometimes I might eat paleo, depending on the day or depending on what's going on. Part of it is actually just due to what I'm in the mood for, what we have in the fridge, what we've been eating that week. So sometimes Megan, my wife, and I decide that, hey, we've had some meat this week and we want to have a vegan day. So we pull out a little tempeh, or we just cut out any of those concentrated protein sources at all and have a meal or two without it. So that would be one reason. When I'm doing more physical activity, like weights, I like to have a little bit more protein, concentrated forms of protein, much easier to get that from an animal source, unless you're using a supplement like a protein powder. So that's where I might go a little bit more on the paleo side. And I also like to sometimes balance my day differently. So I like to have nice high-fat, high-protein meals in the morning, so my blood sugar doesn't go out of control. And sometimes if I am going to do a vegetarian or a vegan meal, I'll save it for the dinner time meal. So I like to have a good protein fat in the morning, good protein fat at lunch, because it helps my cognition throughout the day, helps me get a good work day in. So that's when I would maybe lean towards one or the other. And Megan says, can also be important to look at the big picture. What has the least impact on the planet, a whole food or a supplement? And that's also a great point. So as I mentioned earlier, it's not just black and white, we have to look at many different aspects here. If you're taking a supplement to make up what you should be getting in food, there's a certain amount of energy, there's a certain amount of resources that's going into making that supplement. Most likely your supplement's coming in a plastic bottle. Once we make plastic in this world, it's never going to go away, so we have to consider that. And again, we want to try to get it from the diet because that's the optimal situation. Okay, so we're going to continue here in our discussion about a couple more nutrients. So Does anyone know any plant foods that have a good amount of vitamin A in it? In the comments, just add that if you know of any good plant foods with vitamin A, right? Really key nutrient. We need good sources of vitamin A. If I wanted to get that from a plant, where would I get that vitamin A? Any ideas? Does anyone have any ideas where I would get my vitamin A from? No one. Okay. Well, I guess you all... Okay, so Courtney's saying carrots. Bruce is saying carrots. Okay. Any other guesses where I might get my vitamin A from? I think most people go to the carrots. A sweet potato. Okay, well, thank you so much for your entries, but it was a little bit of a trick question. So there actually is no vitamin A in any animal foods. And Elena, I could see, just popped in the comment there that it's only provitamin A. So the form of vitamin A that we would find in carrots and sweet potatoes, it's actually not vitamin A, it's beta-carotene or other carotenoids. There's actually over 600 different carotenoids that have been identified, and they all have different purposes and different effects. Beta-carotene is one of the most highest affinities to actually be converted into vitamin A, and we do that in our body. So the only way to actually get vitamin A is from animal foods. And again, people have to make that conversion from beta-carotene to vitamin A. What do we need for that conversion? We need good protein status. We need good thyroid status. We need to have good zinc levels, and we also need to have good vitamin C, all of which could possibly be deficient or not working properly in the body. Now, another thing, just to give you an idea of a comparison here, is 1 serving of liver per week reaches your RDA of about 3,000 IUs of vitamin A. To get that same amount of vitamin A, and remember it would be in the form of beta-carotene, you would have to have 2 cups of carrots, 1 cup of sweet potato, 2 cups of kale daily to match what you could get from that piece of liver 1 time a week. So when I'm working again with clients and they might be vitamin A deficient, perhaps they have some digestive issues, maybe they get a lot of infections. Vitamin A is really important for immunity, especially along our mucous membranes. Maybe they have some skin issues going on. Vitamin A is really important for skin health. So we want to get some good vitamin A in them. The quickest, most efficient therapeutic food that I know of is actually liver. Okay? And we can use that to actually help them get that vitamin A in. So again, I'm always looking at someone's physiology, sometimes some of their blood work, to see what the best diet is for them. And then finally, vitamin D is also an example, although we can't get a ton from fish. We can get a little bit from fish. There is a little bit of mushrooms, but it sort of depends how that mushroom grows and which type of mushroom it is. But mostly we have to supplement that anyway. We have a whole other episode of vitamin D if you want to check that out. So what I look at is, I broke it down to a few nutrients, and again, I can look at a lot of these in the blood work. I can look at vitamin B12, pretty standard test. I can look at iron. Serum ferritin is the test to look at to see if iron levels are good. Here in the clinic, we do fatty acid analysis, so it's a pretty cheap and easy test. We can look to see what the EPA and DHA status is, and we can also look to see what vitamin D is at. And if we get all those tests back and they're all within optimal range and this person's on a vegan diet, what am I going to say to them? Bless you. Keep on doing your diet. It's working for you. You're getting everything you need. Go for it. But if they're not, I'm going to say, we need to do a little shift and figure out what foods you need to best serve your body. So, in summary, finding the right diet for you is all about, first of all, how you feel, right, on specific diets, what stage you might be in your life, and also looking at some further testing, blood work, sometimes functional labs, to see if you're on the right track. And to do those, you would need to consult with your doctor or a functional medicine practitioner. But a lot of the time we intuitively know how we feel. I've had people that have maybe been vegan for a while and they get cravings for eggs or beef. And I've had people that, maybe have gone ketogenic for a little too long and are having a craving for a nice big crunchy salad or even some carbohydrates, some starchy vegetables or something. So a lot of it really comes back down to listening to your own body. If you're moving more towards health, then you probably are on the right track. If you're moving away from it, you're probably not on the right track and have to re-examine what you're eating. So at this point, do we have any questions from you guys who are joining us live about vegan, paleo, or any other diet that I mentioned? At the beginning, I mentioned that there's quite a few out there. The FODMAPs, the Atkins, the Rainbow diet, the GAPS diet, the specific carbohydrate diet. Any questions at all on those diets? I see that no one has any questions. So everyone knows exactly what to eat for their body. Alrighty, so I want to, at this point, thank you all. Thank you so much for joining me. This has been another episode of This Week in the Clinic. Today we talked about what is the best diet for you. We looked at some evidence regarding veganism, paleo, and actually I see some questions coming in, so I'm going to address those and then we'll wrap this all up. Anne Welsh is asking, does blood type indicate the right diet? So blood type diet, yes, is a whole other discipline that has been explored. And I personally don't really subscribe to the blood type diet. There's some interesting reasoning behind it, but I've found that there's a lot of other diets that we use in the clinic that can promote healing in a specific way. And I also haven't found that if people are not following their blood type diet, that they get sicker. If you look in the blood type diet book, he mentions things like turtle and some other interesting foods that might not be so common here in Canada or North America at least. So, a lot of it isn't even applicable to a lot of the clients I work with. So blood type diet, not something that I've subscribed to over the years. Okay, and then Bruce is asking cow liver or maybe pig liver. So you know what, it really doesn't matter what liver you're consuming. Cow liver is great, chicken liver is good, duck liver is great. I'm not quite sure if people eat pig liver too much. I don't think I've ever had pig liver. But as long as that animal's healthy and happy, organ meats is actually where a lot of the nutrition is. And if you look in the animal kingdom, you know that, when a lion goes and kills a zebra, one of the first things they go for are the internal organs, because that's where most of the nutrition is. They leave the muscle meat for the vultures and for the other animals that come along and kind of pick at it. They get the slim pickings. And in most indigenous cultures, which is sort of where we just started with this conversation, they are using the whole animal. They're not just eating the muscle meat, which we're obsessed with here in developed countries and Western countries, but they're eating the heart, they're eating the liver, they're eating all parts of the body. They're eating eyeballs, they're eating brains, because that's where a lot of the nutrition is. So again, as long as that animal is healthy, I would be okay with eating all of it. Now, another big thing that has taken a huge surge these days is bone broth, and that's a really great way of getting a lot of the nutrients that are in some of those parts that you wouldn't typically eat. So we don't usually gnaw on bones after we've consumed the meat of that animal. Making a bone broth is a really great way to pull a lot of the nutrients that are in the bones, in the cartilage, in the ligaments, in maybe some of the parts you didn't want to eat, like the neck of a chicken. And by boiling that over a long period of time, in our home when we make bone broths, we boil it for at least 24 hours. You'll find that at the beginning of that boiling process, the bone, you couldn't really break it. At the end, it's so brittle you can actually break it up just in your fingers. And that's because all the connective tissue, the collagen, the chondroitins, glycine, certain amino acids and proteins, and all the minerals in those bones, the calcium, are being sucked out of the bone through the heating and boiling process, and they're going into the liquid, into the bone broth, and that becomes an incredibly healing, nourishing thing to consume. I remember when I was younger, whenever I'd get sick, my mother would get me chicken soup or make me chicken soup, and that was the healing food that she gave me, and that was the healing food her mother gave her, and that was the healing food her grandmother used as well over many, many years. And only recently, bone broth has become, this wonder food that everyone's consuming, and for good reason. There's a lot of great nutrients in it, and it's a great part of the daily diet to get all those parts that we might not consume. So in summary, again, thank you all so much for joining me. I just wanted to convey the idea that it's not about the name of the diet, but it's about what that diet has to offer and feeding your body the right diet for you. That is why I am a Joshitarian. I follow the discipline of Joshitarianism. It is only right for me. It changes regularly depending on the time of day, depending on the week, and depending on what's going on in my life. And I believe that if you guys listen to your body and follow what it's trying to tell you, you can also figure out what the best diet is for you. So thank you so much for joining me for this week in the clinic. I hope to see you all again very soon, and the best way to get started is to get started. Take care and have a great day.